stories of our loves. Even if we died, it would be comfort to know that they ran man's accustomed course. But it would not be so. Young and blooming as they were, they would die, and from the hopes of maturity, from the proud name of attained manhood, they were cut off forever. Often with maternal affection she had figured their merits and talents exerted on life's wide stage. Alas for these latter days! The world had grown old, and all its inmates partook of the decrepitude. Why talk of infancy, manhood, and old age? We all stood equal sharers of the last throes of time-worn nature. Arrived at the same point of the world's age, there was no difference in us. The name of parent and child had lost their meaning. Young boys and girls were level now with men. This was all true, but it was not less agonizing to take the admonition home. Where could we turn and not find a desolation pregnant with the dire lesson of example? The fields had been left uncultivated, weeds and gaudy flowers sprung up, or where a few wheat fields shewed signs of the living hopes of the husbandman, the work had been left half-way. The ploughman had died beside the plough. The horses had deserted the furrow, and no seedsman had approached the dead. The cattle unattended wandered over the fields and through the lanes. The tame inhabitants of the poultry yard, balked of their daily food, had become wild. Young lambs were dropped in flower gardens, and the cows stalled in the hall of pleasure. Sickly and few, the country people neither went out to sow nor reap, but sauntered about the meadows, or lay under the hedges when the inclement sky did not drive them to take shelter under the nearest roof. Many of those who remained secluded themselves. Some had laid up stores which would prevent the necessity of leaving their homes. Some deserted wife and child, and imagined that they secured their safety in utter solitude. Such had been Ryland's plan, and he was discovered dead and half devoured by insects, in a house many miles from any other, with piles of food laid up in useless superfluity. Others made long journeys to unite themselves with those they loved, and arrived to find them dead. London did not contain above 1,000 inhabitants, and this number was continually diminishing. Most of them were country people, come up for the sake of change. The Londoners had sought the country. The busy eastern part of the town was silent, or at most you saw only where, half from cupidity, half from curiosity, the warehouses had been more ransacked than pillaged. Bales of rich India goods, shawls of price, jewels and spices, unpacked, strewed the floors. In some places the possessor had to the last kept watch on his store, and died before the barred gates. The massy portals of the churches swung creaking on their hinges, and some few lay dead on the pavement. The wretched female, loveless victim of vulgar brutality, had wandered to the toilet of high-born beauty, and, arraying herself in the garb of splendor, had died before the mirror which reflected to herself alone her altered appearance. Women whose delicate feet had seldom touched the earth in their luxury had fled in fright and horror from their homes, till, losing themselves in the squalid streets of the metropolis, they had died on the threshold of poverty. The heart sickened at the variety of misery presented, and when I saw a specimen of this gloomy change, my soul ached with the fear of what might befall my beloved Idris and my babes. Were they, surviving Adrian and myself, to find themselves protectorless in the world? As yet the mine alone had suffered. Could I forever put off the time when the delicate frame and shrinking nerves of my child of prosperity, the nursling of rank and wealth who was my companion, should be invaded by famine, hardship, and disease? Better die at once. Better plunge a poniard in her bosom, still untouched by drear adversity, and then again sheathe it in my own. But no. In times of misery we must fight against our destinies, and strive not to be overcome by them. I would not yield, but to the last gasp resolutely defended my dear ones against sorrow and pain. And if I were vanquished at last, it should not be ingloriously. I stood in the gap, resisting the enemy, the impalpable, invisible foe, who had so long besieged us. As yet he had made no breach. It must be by care that he should not, secretly undermining, burst up within the very threshold of the temple of love at whose altar I daily sacrificed. The hunger of death was now stung more sharply by the diminution of his food. Or was it that before, the survivors being many, the dead were less eagerly counted? Now each life was a gem, each human breathing form of far, oh, far more worth than subtlest imagery of sculpted stone. And the daily, nay, hourly decrease visible in our numbers visited the heart with sickening misery. This summer extinguished our hopes. The vessel of society was wrecked, and the shattered raft which carried the few survivors over the sea of misery was riven and tempest-tossed. Man existed by twos and threes. Man, the individual who might sleep and wake and perform the animal functions, but man, in himself weak, yet more powerful in congregated numbers than wind or ocean. Man, the queller of the elements, the lord of created nature, the peer of demigods, existed no longer. Farewell to the patriotic scene, to the love of liberty and well-earned meed of virtuous aspiration. Farewell to crowded senate, vocal with the counsels of the wise, whose laws were keener than the sword-blade tempered at Damascus. Farewell to kingly pomp and warlike pageantry. The crowns are in the dust, and the wearers are in their graves. Farewell to the desire of rule and the hope of victory, to high vaulting ambition, to the appetite for praise and the craving for the suffrage of their fellows. The nations are no longer. No senate sits in council for the dead. No scion of a time-honored dynasty pants to rule over the inhabitants of a charnel house. The general's hand is cold, and the soldier has his untimely grave dug in his native fields, unhonoured though in youth. The market-place is empty. The candidate for popular favour finds none whom he can represent. The chambers of painted state, farewell. To midnight revelry and the panting emulation of beauty, to costly dress and birthday shoe, to title and the gilded coronet, farewell. Farewell to the giant powers of man, to knowledge that could pilot the deep drawing bark through the opposing waters of shoreless ocean, to science that directed the silken balloon through the pathless air, to the power that could put a barrier to mighty waters and set in motion wheels and beams and vast machinery that could divide rocks of granite or marble and make the mountains plain. Farewell to the arts, to eloquence, which is to the human mind as the winds to the sea, stirring and then allaying it. Farewell to poetry and deep philosophy, for man's imagination is cold, and his inquiring mind can no longer expatiate on the wonders of life, for there is no work, no device, nor knowledge, nor wisdom in the grave, whither thou goest, to the graceful building which in its perfect proportion transcended the rude forms of nature, the fretted Gothic and massy Saracenic pile, to the stupendous arch and glorious dome, the fluted column with its capital, Corinthian, Ionic, or Doric, the peristyle and fair entablature, whose harmony of form is to the eye as musical concord to the ear. Farewell to sculpture, where the pure marble mocks human flesh, and in the plastic expression of the cold excellencies of the human shape shines forth the god. Farewell to painting, the high-wrought sentiment and deep knowledge of the artist's mind in pictured canvas, to paradisiacal scenes where the stamped form of tempest and wildest uproar of universal nature encaged in the narrow frame. Oh, farewell, farewell to music and the sound of song, to the marriage of instruments where the concord of soft and harsh unites in sweet harmony, and gives wings to the panting listeners whereby to climb heaven and learn the hidden pleasures of the eternals. Farewell to the well-trod stage. A truer tragedy is enacted on the world's ample scene.